In the 10 years he supported Sarah Jenkins, Daniel Miller fought in 520 underground matches. After getting out of prison, he no longer followed her like a shadow, no longer balled his fists at a passing glance from a stranger. Even at the DMV, when the clerk asked about his marital status while reinstating his ID, he quietly tucked away their marriage certificate, shook his head, and smiled faintly. Single, but someone recognized him. "Hey, you're the guy who made that huge public proposal to Sarah Jenkins, the CEO of Jenkins Corp, a few years back, right?" Daniel froze. He never thought anyone would still remember. "You've got the wrong person," he muttered, turning and walking away quickly. But he had underestimated the reach of Sarah's influence now. Not even 30 minutes later, her car screeched to a halt in front of him. She stepped out, dressed in a snow-white evening gown, her face flushed from champagne, making her look even more stunning. Her eyes, however, were sharp as a blade. "You're out. Why didn't you call me?" Daniel tapped a cigarette from his pack and put it to his lips. "Ms. Jenkins is busy celebrating her company going public. I wouldn't dare disturb you." His nonchalant attitude made Sarah frown. She remembered the old days. When she won a scholarship, he was more excited than she was, lifting her onto his shoulders, laughing like a child with eyes full of light. Now, those same eyes were as still and lifeless as a pool of stagnant water. A knot formed in Sarah's chest. Just then, a passerby recognized her, their gasp cutting through the air. "It's Sarah Jenkins. She and Mr. Vance really are a couple. I heard Ethan Vance loves sailing, so she bought him a $50 million yacht. And tonight, she's putting on a private meteor shower for him." Sarah's heart sank. She shot a look at Daniel, her mind racing for an explanation. But Daniel acted as if he hadn't heard a word, just leaning against the wall, exhaling smoke a million miles away. A strange anxiety bubbled up inside her, and her voice became sharp. "Daniel, it's not what you think. It's Ethan's birthday. He's given years to the company. He's earned this." Daniel gently stubbed out his cigarette and nodded. That was all, just a nod. His detached reaction stung her. "Daniel," her voice softened, laced with a subtle urgency, "don't get the wrong idea. There's nothing going on between Ethan and me." "You don't have to explain," Daniel said, slowly turning his head, his eyes flat. "Ethan Vance was your junior in college, a deep friendship from your school days." "I get it." Sarah froze. Before, the mere mention of Ethan's name would set him off like a stick of dynamite. He'd throw things, his eyes red as he yelled. She'd always snap at him in frustration. "Daniel, can you stop being so possessive? What's wrong with me looking out for him?" But this man in front of her, so calm he was almost cold. Who was he? Panic seized her, and she felt breathless. A custom ringtone blared from her phone. The screen lit up with an intimate photo of her and Ethan set as his contact picture. Sarah answered instantly. "Ethan, Sarah, my stomach hurts. Did you start drinking again? Stay put. I'm on my way." She didn't even notice the raw panic in her own voice. After hanging up, she suddenly realized how bad the ringtone and contact photo looked. "Ethan was just messing with my phone. I'll change it back later." She reached for his hand, her voice gentle. Are you still blaming him for what happened? For why you went to prison? He hit your mother. It was an accident. If you hadn't beaten him so badly he ended up in the hospital, I never would have called the cops, and you wouldn't have. Let's just call it even, okay? Besides, I already punished him for it." Daniel looked up, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "How'd you punish him?" She avoided his eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I docked 1 month of his pay." He laughed. "A life. 5 years in prison. All worth less than 1 month of Ethan Vance's salary." Sarah knew how ridiculous that sounded and moved closer, trying to take his arm. "Daniel, it's all in the past. Let's just move on and have a good life together." She added, "Tonight, come with me to Ethan's birthday party. It'll be a good chance for you two to patch things up." Daniel shifted his body just enough to avoid her touch. She froze, her hand instinctively tightening on his arm. A car screeched to a halt beside them. Ethan Vance stumbled out, clutching his stomach, his face ashen. Sarah shoved Daniel away and rushed to Ethan's side, her voice a mixture of scolding and concern. "I told you to wait for me. Why are you running around when your stomach hurts?" Ethan leaned against her weakly, but his eyes were fixed on Daniel, his expression pitiful. "Daniel, about your mother? I really didn't mean for that to happen." He paused, the corner of his mouth twitching into a nearly invisible smirk. "Oh, and one more thing. Sarah just made me vice president. That position was supposed to be yours, man. You're not mad at me, are you?" The old Daniel would have exploded, would have demanded to know why Sarah would hand the empire he'd bled for over to the man who killed his mother. But now he just remained silent. The smoke from his cigarette obscured his face, leaving only the silhouette of a broken man. Sarah felt a pang in her heart and started to move toward Daniel, but a pained groan from Ethan snapped her attention back. Ethan, is it hurting again? We're going to the hospital right now." She helped him rush into the car, never once glancing back at Daniel. The dust settled. At that exact moment, his phone rang. It was the National Security Agency. "Mr. Miller, are you certain you want to accept Operation Deep Cover in London? This is a maximum risk assignment. Your identity will be erased for 3 years, and all social connections will be severed during that time." Daniel stared in the direction the car had vanished, his eyes as empty as a desert. "I'm certain," he said, his voice perfectly calm. "I have only one condition. Within 7 days, I want my legal marriage to Sarah Jenkins dissolved." The agent on the other end sounded surprised. "Mr. Miller, everyone in leadership knows your history. You fought in the underground circuit to put your wife, Ms. Jenkins, through college and to fund her startup. We've approached you several times before, and you always refused. Why the change of heart?" Daniel gripped his phone, his knuckles turning white. It was true. 10 years, 520 matches, ribs broken and healed, stitches torn open and sewn back up. Every time he stepped into that ring, it was like betting half his life on a single hand. The only thing that kept him going was what she'd said to him when he was 18, kneeling by his hospital bed after he took 8 knife wounds for her in an alley behind a bar. "Daniel," she'd whispered, "from now on, it's just you and me. Those winter nights spent huddled together for warmth, those summer days dreaming about the future, they had once been his entire reason for living. But ever since she met Ethan Vance in college, that starry sky had gone dark, inch by inch." He swallowed the bitter, metallic taste in his throat, his voice raspy and broken. "From now on, I don't have a wife." Late that night, Sarah showed up at the old house in his neighborhood. The moment he opened the door, she frowned and covered her nose. "Why are you still living in a place like this? The mansion is sitting empty. The staff is waiting for you." Daniel said nothing, just glanced around the familiar, worn-out room. She'd probably forgotten that it was this very roof, leaks and all, that had sheltered her when she had nowhere else to go 10 years ago. She'd forgotten all the winter nights they'd spent crammed together on that old sofa, watching their breath cloud in the freezing air as they promised each other forever. The birthday party was at a 5-star hotel. When Daniel arrived in a suit that didn't quite fit, the atmosphere shifted. Someone snickered. "I guess clothes don't always make the man." He's wearing one of Ethan's old suits, but he just can't pull off the same class. Daniel looked at Sarah. She avoided his eyes, keeping her voice down. "It was too last minute to get a new one tailored. You and Ethan are about the same size, so just wear it for tonight, okay?" She expected him to rip the jacket off and storm out, but he just walked calmly to a corner and sat down. The suit looked like an invisible cage, making him seem small and out of place. The only thing that stood out was the dead, gray emptiness in his eyes, which sent an unexpected shiver through Sarah. Just then, a waiter approached. "Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Vance is looking for you." She glanced at Daniel, a troubled look on her face. He simply raised a glass of champagne in her direction. "Go on. He needs you." She replied instantly. "I'll be right back. Wait for me." She was already walking away as she said it. The house lights dimmed, and a single spotlight illuminated the two of them as they stepped onto the stage. Ethan looked sharp and dazzling in his tailored suit. Sarah was on his arm, a vision in a brilliant red dress. Murmurs of admiration rippled through the crowd. A match made in heaven. The perfect couple. Her face glowed with a bright, cloudless smile that Daniel hadn't seen in years. It was the same smile he had once sworn to protect with his life. In the desolate, empty space where his heart used to be, he felt the faint prickle of pain. "Kiss her! Kiss her!" the crowd chanted, the noise swelling like a wave. Through the flashing lights, Daniel saw Sarah shoot a quick glance in his direction. Just a flicker of hesitation. Then, she rose on her toes and planted a feather-like kiss on Ethan's cheek. Daniel calmly looked away, his gaze drifting to the river of city lights outside the window. When he got back to the old house, the first thing he did was pull out his phone and make a call. His voice was perfectly steady. "Book me a flight. To London. 7 days from now." A frantic female voice suddenly exploded behind him. "What flight? Where are you going?" Sarah had practically sprinted to get in front of him, her breathing heavy and the panic in her eyes impossible to hide. "Where are you going?" she demanded, her voice tight. Daniel put his phone away, his eyes looking past her. "Nowhere special." The casualness of his reply was like a needle, jabbing at Sarah's composure. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his cool arm as her voice softened. "Daniel, what happened on stage tonight was just an act for the crowd. I remember you said you wanted to see the mountains out west. Once things settle down at work, we'll go, okay?" She looked up, searching his once fiery eyes for any sign of the man he used to be. Daniel gently pulled his arm away. "I didn't misunderstand," he said. The sudden emptiness in her hand made Sarah flinch. Wasn't this what she wanted? For him to be reasonable? So why did her heart skip a beat, filling her with a strange sense of dread? She quickly regained her composure, slipping back into her usual commanding tone. "Stop living in this old dump. Move back to the mansion." She paused, as if mentioning a routine business matter. "Oh, by the way, Ethan's been sleeping terribly. We've tried everything. We finally consulted a spiritualist who said it's the negative energy from this old house. It clashes with his aura." Her tone was breezy, almost cheerful, as if she were announcing a minor schedule change. "The spiritualist recommended we tear it down and build a waste-to-energy incinerator on the lot. The powerful fire element will cleanse the negative energy." An unnatural silence fell between them. Daniel slowly turned his head, his eyes fixed on her face as if he were looking at a complete stranger. "An incinerator," he repeated, his voice low but laced with a tremor he couldn't hide. "You want to burn trash here?" The house was old, the paint was peeling, and the roof leaked when it rained. But it was also here on a winter night when she was burning with fever that he had warmed a blanket with his own body before wrapping it around her shivering frame. The corner of the chipped wooden table still bore their carved initials. And now, she was saying the place had bad energy and wanted to burn it to the ground, all so Ethan Vance could get a good night's sleep. Sarah looked away, unable to meet his gaze, but her voice remained firm and reasonable. "Daniel, Ethan's an orphan, just like I was. He's had a hard life. As my husband, you should be able to understand that. I'll pay you 10 times the property value. You won't lose a dime. This rundown place is barely." "Take it," Daniel cut her off. He walked to an old drawer, pulled out the yellowed property deed, and placed it gently on the table. "We're even." Sarah stared at the deed, speechless. She suddenly remembered the first time she'd suggested selling the house, years ago. He had looked at her with bloodshot eyes, veins bulging on his neck, his roar still echoing in her memory. "Over my dead body." But now, he was handing it over without a fight. He even offered a small smile. It was a faint smile, but it looked as if the last ember of light in his eyes had finally died. A wave of anger, mixed with panic, washed over her. How could he be so calm? He was an ex-con with no degree, nothing to his name but his fists. Where could he possibly go without her? He had to be bluffing, just trying to get a reaction out of her. Even her voice turned cold and sharp. "Daniel, be realistic. Who else is going to want you now?" Right on cue, her custom ringtone for Ethan began to play. Ethan's voice, weak and needy, came through the phone. "Sarah, I'm so dizzy. The guests are all waiting. I'm on my way," she answered immediately, her tone filled with a frantic concern that was whirled away from the cold woman of a moment ago. Hanging up, she looked at Daniel, her voice rushed. "Come back to the party with me for now. We can talk later." Daniel didn't reply. He had already turned and walked over to the stove. She frowned, hesitating for a second before turning and hurrying away. The sharp, rapid clicks of her heels echoed down the hallway and then faded. The water in the pot on the stove began to boil. Daniel opened a package of ramen noodles. Steam rose, blurring an old mark on the wall where a crooked sun had once been drawn in chalk. He had just lifted the noodles from the water when the worn wooden door was kicked open with a violent bang. Sarah was back, reeking of alcohol and fury. She stormed right up to him and shoved him hard. The bowl tipped, sending scalding broth and noodles splashing across the back of his hand, which instantly turned a raw, angry red. Shards of porcelain scattered across the floor. She didn't spare a glance for the mess or his burned hand. Her eyes, blazing with fury, were locked on his face. "Daniel, did you do this? Did you hire someone to run Ethan off the road? Is this because of that accident 5 years ago? You want him dead, don't you?" Her beautiful face, now twisted in rage, seemed to overlap with the memory of her younger, innocent one, but he couldn't find a single trace of the girl he once knew. She looked the same, but her heart was gone. Daniel tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. How many times had he heard accusations like this? In college, when Ethan lost his scholarship, he'd cried to her that Daniel had reported him. At the company Christmas party, when Ethan got drunk, he'd hidden behind her, whining, "Daniel's trying to kill me." Every single clumsy lie she had chosen to believe. The one that hurt the most was when he'd asked her, his eyes bloodshot, "Do you really trust him that much?" She had snapped back without a second thought. "Yes, Ethan is innocent and clean. And you? You spend all your time in those disgusting underground gyms." She had forgotten that it was in those disgusting gyms that he had risked his life to pay for the very future she was now living. "Daniel," Sarah's voice was shrill. "Can you stop being so damn petty? Your mother's death was an accident." Every word was a hammer blow to his heart. Daniel steadied himself, bent over, and began slowly sweeping the broken pieces of the bowl into a dustpan. He moved slowly, as if he were cleaning up the pieces of something he had long expected to be broken. His unnatural calm grated on her nerves. "Whatever," she said, taking a deep breath and forcing her voice to soften. "Luckily, Ethan is a bigger person than you and isn't going to press charges." She paused, as if a thought just occurred to her. "Your dad's getting on in years. I'll have someone bring him to Chicago to live with us." The words hung in the air, but Daniel didn't respond. He assumed it was an empty offer until his cousin called the next day. "Hey, Daniel, your dad got on a train to Chicago this morning. He should be there by now, right?" After he hung up, a strange sense of dread washed over him. That evening, his phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Miller, get to the mansion, quick. It's your dad, he's..." The call dissolved into static and went dead. Daniel's hands were shaking as he bolted out the door. When he got to the mansion and threw open the door, the metallic smell of blood assaulted him. His father was tied to a wooden chair. All 10 of his fingernails had been ripped out, leaving his fingertips a mangled, bloody pulp. His shirt had been torn off, and the skin on his back was flayed open, as if it had been scrubbed with a wire brush. Blood and fluid soaked the waistband of his pants. "Dad!" Daniel's legs felt like jelly as he stumbled forward. He shoved Ethan and his friends aside, pulling off his own jacket to wrap around his father's shaking body. The old man looked up at him, his lips moving but making no sound. In that instant, white-hot rage burned away every rational thought. Daniel rose to his feet, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. "Stop!" Sarah arrived just in time, shoving him back and shielding Ethan with her body. She glanced at the blood-spattered floor before demanding, "What is going on here?" Her body, however, remained in a protective stance. Ethan's face was pale, his voice full of hurt. "There was a break-in. Someone stole the watch you gave me. I just panicked and..." He shot a look at Daniel, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. "I didn't know he was your father." Hearing this, Sarah pulled Ethan closer behind her. She turned to Daniel, her voice a clear warning. "Daniel, this was a misunderstanding. Ethan didn't do it on purpose." She paused, her voice dropping lower. "If you touch him, I'll call the police. Do you really want to go back to prison?" Daniel froze. She added one more thing, her tone utterly matter-of-fact. "Besides, your father was stealing. It's only natural that he be punished." A dead silence fell over the room. The blood in Daniel's veins turned to ice. He watched her shield Ethan, saw the look of cold judgment on her face, and a memory flashed through his mind. It was the year she started her company. His father had taken out his entire life savings and pressed the cash into Sarah's hands, his own trembling as he said, "Sarah, I support your dream." And now, she was the one branding him a thief. The fist he had clenched slowly uncurled. Daniel lowered his head, blinking back the moisture in his eyes. When he looked up again, he was smiling. It was a faint, heartbreakingly sad smile. He bent down and carefully lifted his dying father onto his back. He paused at the doorway and looked back at Sarah one last time. The moment their eyes met, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. The last flicker of light in his eyes had gone out. After emergency surgery, Daniel's father was stable for now. The doctor pulled Daniel into the hallway, his expression grim. "Your father's heart is extremely weak. This trauma was severe. He's like a candle in the wind. He absolutely cannot endure any more stress." In the hospital room, his father's hand, thin as a twig, clutched Daniel's sleeve. His voice was a ragged whisper, like a broken accordion. "Son, I didn't steal anything." A lump formed in Daniel's throat. All he could do was nod. His father looked at him with clouded eyes and managed a weak smile, still trying to smooth things over. "Don't be mad at Sarah. Running a big company like that isn't easy. Just be patient with her. I know, Daniel said, swallowing the bitter taste in his mouth. He leaned in close. Dad, when you're stronger, I'm taking you out of the country. We're leaving this place for good. A flicker of light appeared in his father's eyes, and he gently patted Daniel's hand. Just then, the door swung open. Where are you taking him? Sarah stood there, holding several expensive-looking gift baskets. She walked to the bedside, her face a perfect mask of remorse. Dad, are you feeling any better? Yesterday was a terrible misunderstanding. I've already had a stern talk with Ethan. Her voice was so soft, you'd almost believe the brutal torture had been nothing more than a simple mistake. A nurse came in to let them know it was time for one final test before discharge. As Daniel moved to help his father up, Sarah stepped in front of him, taking the old man's arm. Her voice was both gentle and firm. I'll do it. This is my fault. Daniel's father glanced at his son, then gently nudged him. It's all right. Let Sarah help me. The old man was trying to give them a chance to reconcile. Daniel stood frozen, watching her support his father as they walked slowly down the hall. The unease in his chest spread like a drop of ink in clear water. The test had just finished when Sarah's phone rang. A panicked voice shouted from the other end. Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Vance was hit by a falling sign. He's losing a lot of blood. He's Rh negative, and the hospital's blood bank is out of his type. They can't find a donor. Sarah's heart ceased. She remembered the chart she'd just seen. Daniel's father's blood type was Rh negative. Without a moment's hesitation, she turned to a nearby orderly and snapped, "Take him to have his blood drawn." Now, as they wheeled his father toward the lab, the old man asked nervously, Sarah, my dear, what's this test for? Sarah didn't break her stride, just glanced back with a bright smile, her tone casual. It's nothing, Dad. Just a routine blood test. In the phlebotomy room, a needle slid into the old man's thin, bruised vein. Dark red blood flowed through a tube into a bag. Then a second bag. The nurse, watching the vital signs on the monitor become erratic, looked up. Ms. Jenkins, he's too weak. We have to stop. Sarah was standing by Ethan's bedside, holding his bandaged hand. Without even looking up, her voice came out cold and clear. Keep drawing. A little extra blood won't kill him. If anything happens, I'll take full responsibility. Meanwhile, back in the hospital room, Daniel's unease had grown into full-blown panic. His father had been gone too long. He was just about to go search for him when a nurse burst in, her face white as a sheet. Mr. Miller, your father's had a massive heart attack. They're trying to resuscitate him now. Daniel's mind went blank as he sprinted toward the ER. The hallway outside was deserted. There were no doctors, only the flashing red light above the door that read, "Resuscitation in progress." The silence was terrifying. He grabbed a passing nurse. The doctors. Where are the doctors for my father? The nurse, startled, stammered that the doctors were all sent to the VIP wing by Ms. Jenkins. There's a more critical situation there. With a shaking hand, Daniel dialed Sarah's number. The first time, she declined the call. The second, it went straight to voicemail. The third time, a cold, automated voice informed him the phone had been turned off. He ran through the hospital like a man possessed, finally cornering an older doctor in the stairwell who was just about to leave for the day. He practically begged him on his knees. The doctor followed him back to the ER. A few minutes later, the door opened. The doctor removed his mask and shook his head, his eyes filled with weariness and regret. We were too late. Cardiogenic shock. I'm so sorry for your loss. Daniel leaned against the cold wall, slowly sliding to the floor. The world around him went silent and gray. He sat outside the morgue all night. As the sky outside the window bled from black to gray, he sat as still as a stone statue. The silence was broken when his phone screen lit up with a new iMessage from Sarah. Daniel, Dad's back in his room resting after his tests, so don't worry. From now on, we'll take good care of him together and make sure he enjoys his golden years. Attached was a photo. Ethan Vance, propped up in a hospital bed, his complexion healthy and pink, smiling for the camera. The edge of the photo showed Sarah's arm as she carefully tucked in his blanket. Daniel stared at the message and the picture for a very long time. Then he bowed his head and his shoulders began to shake. It started as a choked, broken sound, which morphed into a hollow, empty laugh. Finally, the laughter twisted and broke into raw, uncontrollable sobs. He curled into a ball on the cold floor, his fingernails digging so deep into his palms that they drew blood. He regretted everything. He regretted the day he ever met her. After arranging his father's funeral, Daniel went straight to the hospital. Ethan's room was in the VIP wing, where the carpeted hallways muffled every sound. When Daniel pushed the door open, Ethan was propped up in bed, scrolling on his phone. His face was flushed with color. He looked anything but weak from blood loss. Hearing the door, Ethan looked up. When he saw Daniel, a smirk instantly spread across his face. "Daniel," he set down his phone, his voice dripping with false surprise and real satisfaction. "What are you doing here? Came to apologize? You don't have to. I know you didn't mean to hurt me." Daniel walked to the side of the bed and gently placed a small, wooden box on the nightstand. Ethan's smile faltered. "What's that?" "My father," Daniel said, his voice as flat and emotionless as if he were talking about the weather. Ethan's expression flickered, but he quickly rearranged his features into a mask of pity. "Daniel, I'm so sorry about your father, but it was an accident. I just needed blood, and Sarah was so worried about me. That's the only reason So she had him drained dry," Daniel finished for him, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. "Is that right?" Ethan felt a chill run down his spine under that dead gaze. He forced a confident tone. "It was a medical accident. Daniel, you have my condolences." "Condolences," Daniel repeated, then suddenly laughed. "Ethan, what did you say to my father before he died?" Ethan's eyes darted away. "What would I say to him? I didn't even know the man." "The nurse said," Daniel began, taking a slow step forward, "that you went into the room while they were drawing his blood." The air in the room seemed to solidify. The mask of innocence on Ethan's face crumbled away, replaced by a look of pure, undisguised contempt. "That's right," he said airily. "I went in to have a look at the old bastard." At his side, Daniel's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "I told him," Ethan continued, drawing out the words, "that his son is a complete failure, that he worked his ass off to build this company for Sarah, and in the end, it all went to me. I told him how you did 5 years in prison and came out so useless you couldn't even find a job, having to live off your ex-wife's charity. I said the greatest accomplishment of your life was being her punching bag for 10 years. Oh, and now your father got to be my personal blood bank." He grinned, his eyes crinkling. You should have seen the old man's face. He started shaking so hard the heart monitor went crazy. Before he could finish, Daniel's fist connected with his face. Ethan screamed, tumbling from the bed to the floor, blood pouring from his nose. But instead of crying for help, he just grinned, his teeth stained red, his laughter manic. "Go on, hit me again. Daniel, you're nothing but a rabid dog." Daniel grabbed him by the collar, his second punch poised to strike. "Stop!" Sarah's shriek echoed from the doorway. She rushed in, shoved Daniel back, and pulled Ethan behind her, turning to face Daniel with eyes like daggers. "Daniel, can't you ever change? Is violence the only thing you know?" Daniel slowly straightened up, looking at the furious, red-eyed woman in front of him. He watched as she gently helped Ethan to his feet, watched as Ethan collapsed in her arms, sobbing pathetically. "Sarah, I was just trying to apologize to him, and he just..." "Don't be scared, Ethan. I'm here," Sarah cooed, comforting him. When she looked up at Daniel again, her eyes were ice. "I have given you too many chances." She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report an assault. I'm in the VIP wing of Chicago General Hospital." Daniel listened quietly as she described his violent assault to the dispatcher, demanding that the police take it seriously. He waited until she hung up, then spoke her name softly. "Sarah." She looked up. "That," he said, "is the last time I ever want to hear you say my name." Then he smiled. It was a faint, calm smile, but for some reason, it sent a jolt of panic through Sarah's heart. The police arrived quickly. Daniel didn't resist as they cuffed his hands behind his back. As they led him away, he glanced back into the room one last time. Sarah was gently dabbing the blood from Ethan's nose, her expression full of tender concentration. She never looked up. His time in county jail was even harder than his first prison sentence. Daniel was placed in a maximum security wing, and on his first night, 5 inmates cornered him. He didn't fight back. It wasn't that he didn't want to. He couldn't. His dinner had been drugged. They broke 2 of his ribs. His left wrist was shattered with an iron pipe. He heard the bones snap. Lying on the concrete floor, blood dripping from his mouth, he stared up at the single dim light bulb on the ceiling. He remembered Sarah telling him, years ago, "Daniel, you have the warmest hands in the world." Now one of those hands was useless, and the other one probably wasn't far behind. He closed his eyes and smiled. 3 days later, Daniel was released. Sarah was waiting for him at the gate, leaning against her car. When she saw him limp out of the gate, she froze. "Daniel," she said, rushing forward, her eyes fixed on his left hand, which hung limply at his side. "What happened to your hand?" Daniel didn't answer, just kept walking right past her. "Daniel," she yelled, catching up and grabbing his arm. "I'm talking to you." He stopped and slowly turned his head. The look in his eyes made the words die in her throat. They were empty, lifeless, devoid of hate, but also devoid of love. They were like two empty wells. "You," her voice softened. "I've done a lot of thinking these past 3 days. I was wrong. I was too easy on Ethan. Can we please start over? I didn't sell the old house. We can move back in. And when your dad gets out of the hospital, the three of us can be a family again." She pulled a credit card from her purse and pressed it into his good hand. "There's $5 million on this. It's yours. I've also booked the best physical therapists in the city. Your hand, we can fix it." Daniel stared down at the card in his hand for a long time. Then he opened his fingers and the card fell to the pavement. "Sarah," he said, his voice raspy, "I want a divorce." The color drained from her face. "What did you just say?" Just then, her phone buzzed. It was an iMessage from Ethan. "Sarah, my head is splitting open. Where are you?" She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting rapidly. When she looked up, her eyes were frantic. "Daniel, something's come up at the office. An emergency. I have to go. Just grab a cab. We'll talk later." She didn't even wait for him to reply. She jumped in her car, the engine roaring to life, and sped off, disappearing down the road. Daniel stood there, watching her go, a bitter smile twisting his lips. She hadn't even really heard him. Or maybe she had heard him, but one complaint from Ethan was enough to make her forget everything else. Just then, his own phone buzzed. It was a simple text alert. "Mr. Miller, your booked flight, AA-108, departs for London Heathrow at 9:30 p.m. tonight. Please arrive at O'Hare International Airport by 7 p.m. for check-in." A light rain began to fall. Daniel bent down and, with his good hand, picked up the credit card from the wet pavement. He glanced at it for a second before tossing it into a nearby trash can. He flagged down a cab. The airport. Finally, he was leaving. Sarah sat by Ethan's hospital bed, peeling an apple. The knife moved automatically, but her mind was elsewhere. The look in Daniel's eyes as he walked away. It was like a rusty nail that had lodged itself in her heart, impossible to remove. "Sarah," Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She handed him the apple. "Is it still hurting?" "Much better," Ethan said, taking her hand. His fingers were cold. "I just keep having nightmares about Daniel. He must hate my guts, right?" Sarah pulled her hand away. "Don't think about it." But she couldn't stop thinking about it. That last look Daniel had given her was so empty, like staring into a dry well. In 10 years, it was the first time she had no idea what he was thinking. The next day, she had her assistant call a bespoke tailor on Rush Street. "I need 3 custom suits made for Daniel Miller," she said, pausing as she signed a check. "Make sure they're a perfect fit." The assistant asked cautiously, "And what are Mr. Miller's measurements?" She froze. 10 years. In 10 years, she had never once known his shoulder or waist measurements. All she could picture was the faded, worn-out suit he always wore, standing beside her like a silent shadow. "Just use his old clothes as a guide," she stammered, a hot blush creeping up her neck. His phone went straight to voicemail, and the old house was locked up tight. Her assistant couldn't meet her eyes when he gave his report. The neighbors said they haven't seen Mr. Miller in days. Sarah stared at her phone. She had called that familiar number 17 times. Every time, it went to voicemail. That evening, she drove to his old neighborhood alone. The windows of the house were dark. Peeking through a high window, she saw the living room was unervingly clean. The floral throw pillow that used to be on the sofa was gone. Daniel's mother had made it, and Sarah had always thought it was tacky. The cast iron skillet on the stove was scrubbed clean, and in the cabinet, 2 chipped porcelain bowls were stacked neatly. Everything was in its place, but he was gone. It started to rain. She leaned against the door, suddenly remembering the last time she was here. The scalding soup spilling on Daniel's hand. She had been too busy answering Ethan's call to even ask if he was hurt. Her phone buzzed. A voice message from Ethan. "Sarah, my wound hurts. I'm scared of being alone." She stared at the message, then back at the locked door. Suddenly, she raised her fist and slammed it against the wood. The dull thud echoed in the rainy night. Her hand throbbed with pain, but the vast, aching emptiness inside her was far worse. When she got back to the mansion, Ethan was waiting in the living room. "Still no word from Daniel?" he asked, sidling up to her. "If you ask me, He's just throwing a tantrum because you've spoiled him. Give him a few days. He'll come crawling back when he's broke." Sarah said nothing. She remembered the straight line of Daniel's back as he walked away, remembered the barren wasteland in his eyes. Would he really come back? 3 days later, sunlight streamed into the boardroom. The CFO burst through the door, dropping a stack of papers that scattered across the floor. His face was sheet white, his voice trembling. "Ms. Jenkins, Reed Industries just pulled all of their funding." The air in the room turned to ice. The faces of the board members lining the long table were grim. The notice from Reed Industries had arrived at 8 o'clock that morning. By 9, letters of reassessment from their 3 other major investors were sitting in her inbox. The empire she had spent a decade building was about to crumble. "Sarah," the chairman of the board finally spoke, the sound of his fingers tapping the polished table echoing in the silence. "Reed Industries has been our most important partner for a decade. We've never had a single issue." He looked up, his eyes piercing. "What did you do?" Sarah gripped her pen, her knuckles white. "I'll go speak to Mr. Reed personally." "And ask him what?" The boardroom door swung open. Chloe Reed stood in the doorway, dressed in a black power suit so sharp she looked like a drawn sword. She ignored everyone else, walking directly to Sarah and placing a folder on the table in front of her. "My father asked me to give you a message." Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. "Reed Industries invested in your company for 10 years, and it wasn't because we were impressed with your business acumen, Ms. Jenkins." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board members before settling back on Sarah. "It was because of Daniel Miller." Sarah's hand jerked, the pen in her hand scarring the document with a crooked line of ink. 10 years ago, in an underground fight club, he took 3 knife wounds meant for my father, Chloe said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "Each one went down to the bone. My father asked him what he wanted as a reward. Lying in a pool of his own blood, he said." She enunciated each word clearly, like hammering nails into a coffin. "Help my wife start her business." A sharp intake of breath was heard around the room. For the last decade, every investment from Reed Industries and every partnership that all of you in this room have with Jenkins Corp, Chloe's gaze swept over their pale faces, was part of that debt. A debt Daniel paid for with his own blood. And a few days ago, he contacted us. She looked directly into Sarah's eyes and said 2 words. "Debt paid." A breeze from the open door flipped a page of the folder, revealing the official Reed Industries letterhead. The bright red of the company seal looked like dry blood. Chloe turned and walked out. The sound of her heels clicking on the marble floor was like a countdown timer. The second the door clicked shut, the room erupted. Shouts, fists slamming on the table, chairs scraping against the floor, all blended into a roar of panic and anger. Sarah couldn't hear a thing. All she could see were moving mouths, furious faces, the eyes of men who had bowed and scraped before her for a decade and who now looked like they wanted to tear her apart. She stumbled to her feet and fled the room. The door to her office closed behind her, and the world fell silent. With shaking hands, she pulled out her phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." She dialed it again and again. The cold, automated voice repeated the same message 10 times. She opened iMessage. A red exclamation point. Message not delivered. He had blocked her. The realization hit her like a bucket of ice water. She scrolled frantically through her contacts, calling everyone she could think of who might know him, old guards from the prison, former neighbors, the owner of the underground fight club. The answer was always the same. "Haven't seen him in ages." "Daniel? No idea." "Sorry, Ms. Jenkins, I can't help you." Just as she hung up from the last call, her office door opened. Ethan stood there, his face pale, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "Sarah," he stammered, his voice shaking. "Someone trying to kill me. Look at this note." He held out the paper. On it, 4 words were printed in block letters. "Blood for blood." "It has to be Daniel." Ethan grabbed her arm, his fingers like ice. "He blames me for his father's death. This is his revenge. Enough." Sarah screamed, ripping her arm from his grasp. Her phone slipped from her hand and crashed to the floor. The sound of the screen shattering echoed in the silent office. Ethan froze, looking like a statue. He had never seen her like this. Her eyes were bloodshot, her chest was heaving, and her entire body was coiled as tight as a drawn bowstring. "Get out," she rasped. "Sarah, I said get out." She screamed the words with every last bit of strength she had. Ethan stumbled backward out of the room. The door swung shut. Sarah slowly sank to the floor, and picked up her shattered phone. Then she covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders began to tremble. She finally understood what Chloe Reed had meant. Without Daniel, her company was worthless. Without Daniel, she was nothing. The afternoon sun streamed through the panoramic window, bathing her huddled form in light. It was a warm light, but she couldn't feel a trace of it. On the floor, the cracked screen of her phone still showed her last failed message to him. "Your suits are ready. When are you coming home to try them on?" The red exclamation point next to it was like a canyon she could never cross. Sarah searched the entire city for him. She went to the old house in his neighborhood, to the little diner he'd taken her to 3 times. The owner recognized her, paused, and then shook his head. "Haven't seen him in a long, long time." She even went to that place. The underground fight club was hidden in the depths of an abandoned factory on the south side. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and stale cigarette smoke. Her designer suit and high heels were ridiculously out of place as she picked her way across the cracked concrete floor. The club's owner was leaning against the bar with a cigarette in his mouth. He gave her a strange look. "Ms. Jenkins? To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Where is Daniel?" she asked, her voice raw, ignoring the curious stares from the men around them. The owner let out a knowing laugh. "You're asking me? I thought he was your guy. What's the matter? You lose him." "Tell me," she repeated, her nails digging into her palms. The owner studied her for a moment in silence, then simply pointed to the wall behind the bar. A yellowed photograph hung there. In the picture, a much younger Daniel, shirtless and covered in sweat and fresh cuts, blood trickling down his face, was grinning like a little kid. He was clutching a cheap trophy. Scratched into its base were a few crooked words. $50,000 prize. For Sarah's tuition. Sarah forgot how to breathe. She remembered that winter. The tuition bill had arrived at the old house, and she'd spent the night crying under the blankets while Daniel sat in silence. He disappeared the next day. He was gone for 3 days. When he came back, he had 2 broken ribs and $50,000 in cash, which he stacked neatly on the table. "Where did you get this?" she had asked. "Want to fight?" he'd said, grinning through a split lip. And she had believed him. She had taken the money, relieved, and never even asked if he was hurt. Been running this place for a long time. The owner's voice pulled her back to the present. Never seen anyone fight like him. He was like an animal, completely fearless. He paused, asked him once why he did it. He just grinned through the blood and didn't say a word. "The last time I saw him was the day he got out of jail," the owner said, lighting a cigarette and exhaling a cloud of smoke. "He told me, 'Man, I'm done fighting.' I asked him what he was going to do instead." The owner paused, his eyes landing on her. He said, "I want to start a new life." "A new life." The words were like a dull knife, slowly sawing through something inside her. Sarah slumped onto a bar stool, all the strength gone from her body. She suddenly remembered something and rushed out of the club. Daniel's father was his only family. The old man was in the hospital. Daniel must be with him. The thought was a small comfort to her frantic mind. But when she burst into the hospital room, the bed was empty, the sheets neatly folded. She grabbed a passing nurse, her voice tight with panic. "The patient who was in this room, where is he?" Sarah didn't remember how she got back to her office. Riding the elevator up, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, a pale, hollow-eyed ghost. The nurse's words echoed in her head, calm and brutal. "The elderly gentleman? He went into cardiac arrest from excessive blood loss. We couldn't save him. His son was on his knees outside the ER all night. Dead. Daniel's father was dead." The old man who had pressed his life savings into her hand and told her, "Sarah, I support you," had died because she had authorized them to take his blood. She suddenly remembered the last thing Daniel had said to her. "That is the last time I ever want to hear you say my name." She hadn't understood it then. She understood it now. He wasn't angry. He was saying goodbye. His silence when the police came, his compliance at the jail, it wasn't resignation. His heart had already died. Sarah dug her fingers into her hair, her nails scraping her scalp. The sharp pain, a welcome distraction. But what was this small pain compared to what Daniel had lost? Compared to the agony his father must have felt at the end? "The patient is too weak. We have to stop," the nurse's voice echoed in her memory. And what had she said? "Keep drawing. A little extra blood won't kill him." Every word was a poison needle, stabbing her now in the heart. There was a soft knock on her office door. Her assistant peeked in, his face pale. "Ms. Jenkins, there are 2 men here to see you." They walked straight toward her. The man in the lead produced a badge, his movements crisp and practiced. "Miss Sarah Jenkins? National Security Agency." The seal on his credentials seemed to glow in the dim office light. "We're here on behalf of Agent Daniel Miller to deliver his divorce decree." A thin folder was placed on her desk. Sarah stared at it, not moving. The clinical, sterile color of the legal document was a brutal contrast to the vibrant red of their marriage license, she remembered. Additionally, the agent said, his voice flat, Agent Miller's exemplary conduct during his incarceration led to his recruitment into the Bureau. He asked us to pass on a message. The 3 accidents you've had over the past few years, the brake failure in September of 21, the elevator malfunction in March of 22, and the electrical fire in your office this past January, were all threats that he identified and had us neutralize. He paused, as if reciting a line from a script. His words were, "Consider it the last thing I'll ever do for her." In that moment, the world went silent. All she could hear was a high-pitched ringing in her ears and his words, echoing over and over. The last thing, the last thing." She lunged forward and grabbed the agent's sleeve, her fingers ice cold. "Where is he? Please, you have to tell me where he is." The agent gently but firmly pulled his arm free. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's classified." They turned and walked away, their figures disappearing down the dark hallway. It felt like a dream, and when she woke, the only thing left was the divorce decree on her desk. Sarah stared at it for so long her eyes began to burn. She tried his number again, desperately. The disconnected tone beeped in her ear, each beep a mocking laugh. Sarah stood frozen in the silent room. The folder slipped from her numb fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud that sounded to her like a heart breaking. She slowly crouched down to pick it up, but her fingers were shaking too badly to grasp it. After 3 tries, she gave up. She just curled into a ball, burying her face in her knees. A broken, strangled sob escaped her throat. The old photograph in her hand was now crumpled beyond recognition. In the photo, the young Daniel was still smiling, a smile so bright and full of life it seemed to contain all the light in the world. And now, huddled on the floor of her empty office, Sarah finally understood. That light, which had once shone only for her, was gone forever. The collapse of Jenkins Corp took only a week. The letters from investors pulling their funding piled up on her desk. Return orders flooded in. The stock price plummeted. The bank called from dawn until dusk, demanding repayment. Sarah sat in her office, staring out at the glittering Chicago skyline. And for the first time in her life, she felt a cold that went all the way to her bones. On the morning of the 4th day, a manila envelope with no return address appeared on her desk. It was very light. She tore it open. Inside was a single black flash drive. Her fingers were numb as she plugged it into her laptop. She clicked it open. There were 3 folders. The first was labeled Ethan Vance. He wasn't an orphan. His parents were alive and well, running a small grocery store in Milwaukee. He was married. The name of his spouse was unfamiliar. The wedding had been 5 years ago. Under children, it listed one daughter, age 3. Sarah stopped breathing. She stared at the family photo. Ethan was holding a little girl, a sweet-faced woman standing beside him. The 3 of them were at an amusement park, smiling. The timestamp in the corner read December 25th, last year. Last Christmas. He'd told her he had to work late. She had waited for him at the office until after midnight before falling asleep on the couch. The second folder, Financials. It contained page after page of wire transfers. Over the past 3 years, money had been funneled from Jenkins Corp and its subsidiaries, disguised as consulting fees and project commissions, into 17 different shell accounts, before finally ending up in a single offshore bank account. The total amount was $84 million. The single largest transfer, for $50 million, was dated the day after Daniel got out of jail. The third folder, Audio. She clicked play. There was the sound of a crowded bar, and then Ethan's voice. It wasn't the soft, gentle voice she knew, but a slurred, arrogant drawl. "Sarah Jenkins? The woman's an idiot. Actually thinks I'm in love with her. She's just a washed up." She slammed her hand down on the mouse, stopping the playback. Her knuckles were white. After a few seconds, she clicked play again. "Daniel's mother? Of course I hit her on purpose. The old bitch was always ruining my plans. And when they were drawing his old man's blood, I went in and had a little chat with him. Told him his son was a worthless dog who'd lost everything, including his company, to me. The old man started shaking so hard his heart monitor went nuts. That time Daniel almost got killed in the ring? Yeah, I paid his opponent to finish him. Too bad the son of a bitch has a hard head." The recording went on, detailing every lie, every betrayal. Each word was a poison dart in her ear. She sat frozen in her chair, her body turning to stone. 10 years. For this man, she had driven Daniel away. She had ignored her own family. She had killed Daniel's father. What she thought was love had been nothing but an elaborate, cruel lie. Her love had been a joke to him. The empire she had given him was just a stepping stone for his plan to leave the country. The glow of the monitor lit her face, making it look as pale as a ghost. She pressed a hand to her chest. There was a hollow space there, as if something had been gouged out with a dull spoon. She finally understood that regret, when it comes too late, is a pain so deep it leaves you breathless. When Sarah found Ethan, he was in the basement of the mansion, packing a suitcase. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he asked, turning around, his face instantly morphing into its familiar, innocent mask. "Where are you going?" Sarah's voice was frighteningly calm. I was thinking of going abroad for a while, to clear my head." "With your wife and kid?" she asked, then threw the folder of documents in her hand directly at his face. Papers scattered across the floor. The family photo fluttered down, landing at his feet. Ethan stared at it for a second, then bent down, picked it up, and smiled. It was a smile of pure contempt. "So, you found out," he said with a shrug. "Guess you're not as stupid as I thought." "Why?" Sarah heard her own voice shake. "Why?" Ethan laughed as if she just told the funniest joke in the world. "Sarah, you should ask yourself that question. Besides that idiot Daniel, who on earth could ever put up with you?" He stepped closer, looking down on her for the first time. "You're arrogant, selfish, and you look down on everyone. Did you really think I loved you? I only ever wanted your money. But you were even easier to fool than I imagined. The empire Daniel nearly died to build for you, and you handed it over to me without a second thought. It's almost sad." Sarah slapped him across the face. The sharp crack echoed in the empty basement. Ethan turned his head back slowly, his eyes glinting with malice. "What's wrong? Having regrets? Too bad. Daniel will never take you back. Do you know where you were when his father was dying? You were sitting by my bed, peeling an apple for me." He leaned in, his voice a low whisper in her ear. "And one more thing. That last fight Daniel had, the one where he broke 3 ribs, I paid someone to drug his water bottle before the match. I was hoping he'd die in that ring. Pity." Before he could finish, the basement door burst open. 4 men in black ski masks stormed in, moving with the speed of predators. Ethan didn't even have time to scream before he was on the ground, his arms pinned behind his back. "Who are you? Let me go. Sarah, help me." Sarah stood frozen, watching them. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't resist when they took her, too. The fight club was lit up, but completely empty. The spotlights above the ring were all on, bathing the canvas in harsh, bright light. They dragged Ethan onto the stage. Sarah was led to a seat in the front row. 2 men stood behind her, silent and imposing. The owner's voice boomed from the sound system. "Ms. Jenkins." Daniel left a message before he left. He said he would collect every debt that was owed to him. On the stage, the men began. It was a brutal, primitive beating. The sickening thud of fists hitting flesh, the sharp crack of bone, Ethan's screams, all of it echoed through the empty arena. "Sarah, help me. I was wrong. I was so wrong," he cried, reaching a bloody hand out to her. Looking at him, Sarah suddenly remembered the day Daniel had come home with his ribs broken. He had reached for her then, just like this, but she had gotten a call from Ethan and walked away. "Continue," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried clearly to the stage. The beating went on for a long time, long enough for Ethan's screams to turn into whimpers and then into ragged gasps for air. When the men finally stopped, he was a broken heap on the canvas, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles. The owner's voice came over the speakers again. Daniel said he wouldn't get his own hands dirty, but justice still needs to be served. He paused. "This one will be dropped off at the nearest police station with an anonymous tip about embezzlement and attempted murder. How long he survives in prison, well, that's up to him." The men dragged Ethan away like a sack of garbage, disappearing backstage. The lights went out, one by one, until only a single dim bulb remained, shining down on Sarah's solitary figure. She sat there, staring at the dark red stain on the canvas, and began to laugh. This was her punishment, to be forced to watch the fantasy she loved be destroyed, while the man she should have treasured was long gone, pushed away by her own 2 hands. London, a physical therapy clinic. Daniel's left hand was strapped into a rehab machine, beads of sweat dotting his forehead. "Excellent. Just 10 more seconds, his therapist said, her voice encouraging. The machine beeped. The therapist unstrapped his hand and examined the wrist. You're healing faster than I expected, Daniel. You're the most determined patient I've ever had. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow with a towel. How long until I get my full grip strength back? At least 2 more months, she said. But at the rate you're going, it could be sooner. You had to be faster. The Bureau's training schedule was relentless. Mornings were for combat and firearms training. Afternoons were for languages and intelligence analysis. Nights were for tradecraft and psychological conditioning. 18 hours a day, with only 4 hours for sleep. He had requested it himself. He needed to be busy, too busy to remember the past. That evening, he met Chloe at a cafe on the corner. She was sitting by the window, a cup of black coffee, now cold, in front of her. Her eyes lit up when she saw him walk in, but she quickly composed herself. "How's your hand?" she asked. "Getting better," Daniel replied, taking a seat. The waiter brought him his usual order, a black Americano. No sugar, no cream, just bitter. Chloe studied him. In the 3 months since she'd last seen him, he'd gotten thinner, the lines of his face sharper. "I heard what happened with Jenkins Corp," she said quietly. "I hear. She regrets it." Daniel didn't stop stirring his coffee. "It has nothing to do with me," he said. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a mountain. Chloe opened her mouth to say something, but closed it again, taking a sip of her cold coffee instead. "Daniel," she began, looking up, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "For all these years, Chloe," he interrupted, meeting her gaze directly. "Do you know what my next assignment is? Something dangerous. Something that will probably get me killed," Daniel said with a small, humorless smile that didn't reach his eyes. 3 years undercover. My identity will be erased. If my cover is blown, they won't even find a body. Chloe's eyes welled up, but she stared back at him, defiant. "I'm not afraid." "I am," Daniel said, his voice dropping. "I'm afraid of wasting your time." A long silence stretched between them. Chloe picked up a napkin and dabbed at the corners of her eyes. Then she looked up at him, forcing a smile. "And what if you do come back alive?" Daniel looked out the window. He suddenly remembered another rainy day. Years ago, a girl had ducked under his umbrella, linked her arm through his, and said, "Daniel, let's be together forever." The rain had felt warm then, full of hope for the future. Today, the rain was cold, just like his heart. "If I make it back alive," he said, turning to look into Chloe's tear-filled eyes, "then we'll give a try." A tear finally escaped and rolled down her cheek, but she smiled, a smile as bright as the sun after a storm. 3 years later, Washington, D.C., a classified awards ceremony at NSA headquarters. Daniel stood in a dress uniform, his chest covered in medals. He was leaner than he had been 3 years ago. His eyes were sharp as a hawk's, and his left hand was fully healed. "Agent Miller," the director said, pinning the final medal to his chest. "Codename Pathfinder. In your 3 years undercover, you dismantled an international crime syndicate, seized assets worth over $200 million, and rescued 83 victims of human trafficking. For this, you are awarded the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal." The room erupted in applause. It was a small crowd, all agency personnel, but the applause was heartfelt and strong. Daniel stood at attention and saluted. After the ceremony, he walked out of the building. In a corner of the parking garage, a flash of red stood out against the dark concrete. It was Chloe. She was wearing a stunning red dress, her hair swept up, and she looked breathtaking. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, and she walked slowly toward him. "Congratulations," she said, smiling, though her eyes were red. "Thank you," Daniel said. "And thank you for taking care of my father's grave for the past 3 years." Chloe shook her head. "He felt like my own father." She paused, then pulled a worn manila envelope from her clutch. It was obvious she'd been carrying it for a long time. "Daniel, do you remember what you said to me in London?" Daniel nodded. Of course he remembered. "This is my dowry," Chloe said, her hand trembling slightly as she held out the envelope. "It's 51% of the shares of Reed Industries. I've already had them transferred into your name." Daniel didn't take it. He looked from the envelope to her eyes. They were filled with hope and fear in equal measure. "I don't want it," he said, gently pushing the envelope back toward her. "Why not?" Chloe asked, her voice breaking. "I want you to have it." "Chloe," Daniel said, taking her hand. It was cold and trembling slightly in the autumn air. "If I had wanted money, I never would have left 3 years ago." He paused, his voice softening as if he were calming a frightened child. "But I always keep my promises." Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Really?" she whispered. "Yes," Daniel said, gently wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You keep the shares. I don't need them." Chloe threw her arms around him, sobbing. She had waited 3 long years to hear him say that. He patted her back gently, the motion unfamiliar. It had been a long time since he had held anyone. After a few moments, Chloe's sobs subsided. She pulled back, her eyes red and swollen, but her smile was radiant. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice low, her fingers twisting the fabric of her dress. "Do you want to know what happened to Ethan Vance?" Daniel's body tensed. "In prison," Chloe said softly, "some of the other inmates broke both of his hands. He suffered a severe head injury. He has permanent brain damage. They moved him to a state psychiatric hospital." Daniel was silent for a long time. "I see," he said finally, his voice completely neutral. Chloe looked at his calm profile and realized that he had truly moved on. He had let go of so much that there wasn't even any room left for hate. Part of the ceremony was open to the press. As the decorated agent who brought down a major international syndicate, Daniel was scheduled for a brief press conference. Camera flashes strobed across the stage. He answered the reporters' questions calmly and articulately, a world away from the quiet, brooding man he had been 3 years ago. In the audience, a woman in a baseball cap and a surgical mask stared up at him, her eyes wide. It was Sarah. The last 3 years had been a living hell for her. Her company had gone bankrupt. Her assets were liquidated, the mansion auctioned off. She had gone from a multimillionaire CEO to a broke, disgraced debtor. And it was all because she had thrown Daniel away. She had spent 3 years looking for him. Then, she saw his picture in the news. Decorated federal agent Daniel Miller. She had snuck into the press conference, and now, looking at the confident, powerful man on the stage, her heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. That was her Daniel. But it wasn't her Daniel anymore. When the interview was over, Chloe walked onto the stage and, in front of all the cameras, kissed him on the cheek. The room erupted in applause. Something inside Sarah snapped. She rushed the stage, grabbing Daniel's hand as everyone stared in shock. "Daniel, it's me. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, just come back to me." Daniel pulled his hand away, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, I think you have the wrong person." "No, I don't," Sarah cried, ripping off her mask to reveal a face worn down by hardship. "It's me, Sarah. Daniel, look at me." Daniel looked at her. 3 years of suffering had left their mark. The once glamorous, beautiful Sarah Jenkins now had hollow eyes and wore shabby clothes. She looked like a crazy person, and as he looked at her, he felt nothing at all. "Sarah," he said, his voice flat, "we're divorced. You filed the papers." "I never signed them," she sobbed. "Daniel, we were together for 10 years. You can't just throw that away." 10 years, Daniel said, a cold, cruel smile on his face. "That's right, 10 years. 10 years I spent fighting in rings for you. 5 years I spent in prison for you. And in the end, you cost my father his life." He took a step closer, his voice low but every word sharp as a razor. "Sarah, how many chances did I give you? When Ethan killed my mother, you called an accident. When he took everything I had built, you said he deserved it. When he tortured my father, you called it a misunderstanding. And when you let him drain my father of the last of his blood, you said it was necessary." He looked at her ashen face and asked quietly, "So you tell me, what is it exactly that I owe you?" Sarah collapsed to the floor, unable to speak. Security guards came and dragged her away. Daniel straightened his uniform, offered an apologetic smile to the reporters. "My apologies for the interruption." He took Chloe's hand, and they walked off the stage together. He never looked back. It was a rainy spring day. Daniel held a black umbrella in one hand and Chloe's hand in the other. As they walked up the familiar path in the cemetery, they saw a figure kneeling in front of his father's grave. It was Sarah. She was wearing a thin, faded coat, and her wet hair was plastered to her face. She looked up at the sound of their footsteps, her eyes red and swollen. "Daniel," she said, stumbling to her feet, her voice a raw whisper. "I knew you'd come." Daniel didn't even look at her. He walked to the headstone and placed a bouquet of white lilies at its base. He knelt in the wet grass, resting his forehead against the cold stone for a long moment. Chloe knelt beside him, bowing her head respectfully. "Dad," Daniel said softly, wiping the rain from the engraved letters of the headstone. "I'm here. This is Chloe." Your daughter-in-law. She takes good care of me. Chloe squeezed his hand, her fingers lacing with his. Daniel, Sarah cried, rushing forward and grabbing his arm. You can't marry her. I'm your wife. We have 10 years of history. 10 years, Daniel said, slowly getting to his feet and pulling his arm from her grasp. He looked at her, his eyes as cold as the spring rain. Sarah, do you really think you have a right to talk about those 10 years? He took a step forward, and she instinctively took one back. In those 10 years, I had 3 broken ribs, a shattered wrist, and 28 stitches in my back. Did you ever bother to count? He took another step forward with each sentence, until she was backed up against the cold marble of another headstone. When my ribs were broken, you were at Ethan's birthday party. When my wrist was shattered, you were helping him pick out a tie. And when my father was lying in hospital bed after being tortured, he said, gesturing to the grave at his feet, you were draining him of his blood to save the man who killed my mother. Daniel laughed, a sound as bleak and cold as the rain. And now that you've lost everything, now you remember me? No, Sarah sobbed, shaking her head, tears and rain mixing on her cheeks. Daniel, I love you. I've always loved you. Ethan tricked me. He blinded me. Tricked. Daniel cut her off, his voice rising to a shout. Did I hold a gun to your head and make you believe his lies? Did I tie your hands and force you to hurt me? Did I force you to sign off on my father's death warrant? Sarah froze, her lips trembling, unable to form words. Sarah, you were never tricked, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a low, cutting whisper. You were just selfish. You wanted my devotion, but you were ashamed of me. You needed me to protect you, but you envied Ethan's clean reputation. You wanted everything, and you valued nothing. And now that it's all gone, you finally feel the pain, he said, looking at her pale face. But what is your pain compared to what I went through? Sarah collapsed onto the muddy ground, the cold water soaking through her clothes. She looked up at him, this man who had once treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and who now looked at her like she was a stranger. Daniel, I'm so sorry, she wailed, her fingers clawing at the wet earth. I regret it so much. Please, just give me one more chance. Just one. I'm begging you. Daniel turned his back on her and took Chloe's hand. Let's go. Daniel! Her shriek echoed across the empty cemetery. He held the umbrella over Chloe as they walked down the stone steps together. He didn't look back. Not once. On the day Jenkins Corp was officially liquidated, Sarah sat outside a conference room filled with creditors for the entire afternoon. She signed document after document. Stock transfers, asset auctions, debt acknowledgments. She was numb, signing her name and pressing her thumbprint onto the ink pad like a machine. Everything was sold. The jewelry, the designer bags, the custom shoes, even the yacht that had been the talk of the town. The $50 million yacht she had bought for Ethan's birthday without a second thought. The money from the sale was just enough to cover her debts. When she walked out of the courthouse, all she had to her name was the out-of-style suit she was wearing and an old wallet with $32 inside. She had nowhere to go. She stood on the street corner, watching the traffic rush by. And for the first time, Chicago felt like a foreign city. In 10 years, she had built an empire here, and in 10 years, she had lost it all. And then, she thought of the old house. The place she had once called a dump, the place she had wanted to tear down and replace with an incinerator. She'd lost the key long ago. She climbed over the short brick wall in the back, twisting her ankle as she landed, the sharp pain making her hiss. She limped to the back door and pushed. It was unlocked. Inside, everything was just as it had been 3 years ago. The rusty skillet on the stove, the paint-chipped table, the stack of old newspapers in the corner. And on the wall, the crooked, chalk-drawn sun. She walked over to it, her fingers tracing the faded lines. The moment she touched it, the memories came rushing back. It had been a brutally cold winter, and the heat in the old house was broken. She and Daniel had huddled together on the old sofa under a single blanket. She had been shivering, and he had taken her frozen hands and tucked them under his shirt to warm them against his skin. Sarah, when I make some money, I'm going to buy you a huge house, he had said, his breath turning to steam in the cold air. I don't want a huge house, she had replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. I just want you to always be with me. He had drawn a sun on the wall. Then we'll just draw suns all over the house, he'd said. That way, it'll always be warm inside. He took her hand in his and guided it, showing her how to draw. You have to draw it like this, so it looks like it's smiling. The winter sun had streamed through the window then, catching in his eyelashes. She had looked at his focused profile and thought that she could be happy like this for the rest of her life. When had everything changed? Was it when she got her first round of funding and started attending galas and cocktail parties? Was it when she met Ethan and he flattered her, calling her a brilliant young CEO? Or was it the first time she told Daniel, "Ethan needs this promotion more than you do. Just be patient"? She didn't know. All she knew was that when she finally turned around, he was gone. She had pushed him away herself. Once, twice, 100 times. She had pushed and pushed until he was too tired to stay. And then he left, and he never came back. Sarah curled up in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. She should have been crying, but her eyes were dry and sore. She couldn't produce a single tear. The regret was a dull knife, sawing back and forth in her chest. It wasn't a fatal wound, but the pain was so intense she could barely breathe. She finally understood what Daniel had meant when he left. He had given her the house. He had given her 10 years of his life. He had given her his father's life. And then he had walked away, clean, without even leaving her his hatred to cling to. He had left her here alone, in the ruins of their shared memories, to spend the rest of her life staring at a son that would never smile again. Daniel and Chloe's wedding was planned for the autumn in London. Chloe had chosen the church, an 800-year-old chapel with magnificent stained glass windows that threw kaleidoscopic patterns of light across the stone floor. An hour before the ceremony, Chloe was in the bridal suite, looking at her reflection in the mirror. She was breathtakingly beautiful in her wedding gown, but a small frown creased her forehead. Her phone buzzed. She picked it up. It was a text from an unknown number. Sarah Jenkins arrived at Heathrow early this morning. She was in a car accident on her way into the city. Double leg amputation. She's in critical condition in the ICU at St. Mary's Hospital. Chloe's fingers froze on the screen. "Is everything all right, Ms. Reed?" the makeup artist asked. "It's fine," Chloe said, putting down her phone. She took a deep breath, gathered her skirts, and walked out of the room. In the groom's waiting room, Daniel was adjusting his cufflinks. The tailored black tuxedo made his shoulders look broad and his waist narrow. He had a quiet confidence about him that was magnetic. "Daniel," Chloe said, pushing the door open. Daniel looked up, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. "What is it?" "It's Sarah," Chloe said softly. "She's in London. She was in a car accident. They had to amputate both of her legs. She's in the ICU." Daniel's hands paused for a fraction of a second. Just a second. Then he finished fastening his cufflink. His voice was perfectly calm. "We're not going to let an irrelevant person ruin our wedding day." "You're not," Chloe began. "You're not going to go see her?" Daniel turned and walked over to her, taking her hands in his. His were warm and steady. "Chloe," he said, his eyes full of a gentle certainty. "Today is our wedding day. My past is over." He paused, then said, enunciating each word clearly, "My future is you." Chloe's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. The wedding began right on schedule. The first notes of the wedding march swelled from the pipe organ, the sound filling the vaulted ceiling of the ancient church. Daniel stood at the altar, watching as Chloe walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Her long white veil trailed behind her, and she looked like something out of a dream. The light from the stained glass windows painted her in shifting colors, making her seem to glow from within. Daniel suddenly remembered that he had once dreamed of a wedding just like this. A beautiful bride in a white dress, smiling as she walked toward him. He had always thought that bride would be Sarah, but she had destroyed that dream. Now he was getting a new beginning. Chloe reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in his. The moment their hands touched, Daniel felt a sense of peace and rightness that he hadn't felt in a very long time. The priest began the vows. "Daniel, do you take this woman, Chloe, to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Daniel looked into Chloe's eyes and saw his own reflection there. "I do." At that same moment, in the ICU of St. Mary's Hospital, Sarah Jenkins was lying in a sterile white bed, a tangle of tubes connected to her body. The anesthesia was beginning to wear off, and a phantom, agonizing pain was shooting through her legs. The space where her legs used to be was now just a thick wrapping of blood-soaked gauze. Her vision was blurry, but she managed to turn her head. The television on the wall was on, the volume turned down low. It was the afternoon news. The screen cut to a breaking story about a high-profile wedding. The camera panned over an ancient, beautiful church packed with guests. And then she saw him, Daniel, standing at the altar in a black tuxedo, and Chloe, in a white wedding dress, walking toward him. They looked so beautiful together, so perfect. The camera zoomed in. She saw Daniel slide a ring onto Chloe's finger. She saw them smile at each other. She saw him lean down and kiss her. The smile on his face, it was one she had never been able to give him. He looked so relaxed, so happy. There was light in his eyes again. Tears blurred her vision. Sarah's mouth opened, but only a strangled, rattling sound came out. A nurse noticed and rushed to her bedside. "You're awake. Try not to move. You're still in critical condition." Sarah couldn't hear her. Her eyes were fixed on the television screen, on the man who had once been hers, now promising his life to another woman. With the last of her strength, her lips began to move. The nurse leaned in closer to hear. She could just make out the words, whispered on a dying breath. "Daniel, if there's a next life, let it be my turn to love you." The heart monitor let out a long, piercing tone. The green line on the screen spiked once, twice, and then went flat. "Doctor! Doctor!" the nurse screamed, running out of the room. The room was silent again. The only sound was the happy chatter and applause from the wedding on the television. The camera lingered on the image of the bride and groom, locked in a kiss. Daniel's eyes were closed, his kiss full of a deep, quiet reverence. It was a kiss that said goodbye to the past and hello to a new life. Outside, the London sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The church bells began to ring, their sound carrying over the city, long and clear. Two worlds apart, a lifetime of regret,